What is the weirdest thing that happened to you at a concert? Story 1. I was at a music festival with my dad when I was 16, and he went to sit down, so I was standing there alone watching the Red Hot Chili Peppers. A middle-aged woman, somewhere in her 40s or 50s, comes up to me and says, "Do you want to go up to the front? I can show you how to get up there." And I say, sure. She grabs my arm, pulls me along, and starts yelling, "Medical emergency. We got a medical emergency here. Coming through. Coming through." About 2 rows from the front. She lets go of my arm, gives me a big smile and says, "Enjoy the show, Han." Completely unhinged behavior. But hey, I had a great time up there. Story 2. I was just chatting with who I thought was another random concert goer and realized once the concert began that she was actually the vocalist for one of the bands that was playing. After the show, she added me as a friend on Facebook, and we continued chatting daily for a few months after their tour ended. Story 3. After the opener, Godsmack, finished, a lady came up to me and my 3 friends and said, "Would you 4 like to sit in the front row?" She then escorted us to the front, swapped out our tickets, and there we were, center stage, front row, for Black Sabbath. Story 4. Chili Peppers concert. A girl kept walking by me looking at me nervously, and some dude was following her. The last time she mouthed help, so I just grabbed her and said, "Hey, there you are," and put my arms around her. The dude stared at me for a while and walked off. She thanked me and said he was following her around. She got flirty with me then, and after a bit, walked off. When we were leaving the concert, she waved at me and said, "Thank you," and my girlfriend asked me who she was. When I told her, she got all pissed and wanted to fight her because my ex was insane. Story 5. I don't know if it's the weirdest, but definitely the funniest. This was Rob Zombie in 2002. It certainly wasn't out of the ordinary at a concert to see girls get up on a guy's shoulders and flash the band. I don't know how drunk this girl was, but she decided that wasn't good enough and needed to take her pants off while on this guy's shoulders. What transpired can only be described as some sort of slow-motion drunken lucha libre move that brought both of them and a couple of others down to the ground. Story 6. When I was a teenager, I saw a band called After the Burial, a metal/gent band at First Avenue. Anyway, I was in the heat of a big mosh pit. I locked eyes with a girl who was throwing down next to me. I got pushed into her. I grabbed her because I almost knocked her over. We looked at each other up close and were hugging. She immediately started making out with me. We were both pretty small. I'm 5 feet 4 inches. She couldn't have been taller than 5 feet 1 inch. This big guy saw us and yelled, "Protect the little couple." We stood at the edge of the mosh pit and made out. He stood between us and the pit and prevented anyone from crashing into us. It felt like I was in a movie, kissing this cute girl while the band was shredding on the last song of the night. Anyway, I gave that guy a cigarette after the show ended and got the girl's number. 10 years later, just kidding. She lived really far away from me, so nothing happened. It's a good memory, though. Story 7. At a Disturbed concert, we were right at the edge of the mosh pit. Some guy brings a couple of beers in and starts throwing them around. He is immediately kicked out of the pit, and I hear one guy yelling at him, "Dude, you can't bring beer into a mosh pit. It's common courtesy." I had no idea there were rules of etiquette for a mosh pit. Story 8. I was at a concert in Austin, Texas, during South by Southwest about a decade ago. A woman standing next to me was bouncing along to some tune being played at the time, seemingly happy as could be. We were all vibing along, having a good time, and I casually turned to her and said, "She's brilliant, isn't she?" Referring to the group on stage. I can't remember the name of the band now. They weren't very big, and I'd never heard of them before that night, nor do I believe I've seen them since. It's a shame, they were good. Anyway, brilliant isn't a word I normally use to describe something, but for some reason, that's the word I happened to use at that moment. Upon hearing me talking to her, she turned to me, completely red in the face, and shouted in a very heavy British accent of some region I'm not sure of, but it sort of sounded like estuary if I were to make a guess. "I will not be mocked." She all but took a swing at me, and her 2 friends had to pull her back from me. They disappeared into the crowd. I have no idea what that was about. Story 9. First concert I ever went to was the Guess Who. It was outside, basically in a big field. I was 13. This was around 1970. I'm trying to get closer. There is a crowd of people sort of in a circle in front of me. Somehow, I push through and see two people banging on the ground. Shocked me greatly at 13 years old. Story 10. In 2005, I attended the Sounds of the Underground tour at the Starland Ballroom parking lot. It was a 12-hour concert filled with loads of people and was an amazing show. In the middle of drinking a beer with friends, I noticed a very large man arguing with a girl who was maybe 5 foot 1 inch tall. Out of nowhere, 3 other guys come running up and break 3 bottles over this man's head. Security quickly intervened, scooping him up and carrying him away, with blood everywhere. A friend I went with was there, and it was his first metal concert. He decides that he wants to get into the pit despite our advice against it, but he goes anyway. GWR was playing, and 5 seconds in, he breaks his ankle. He was promptly scooped up and taken away. He came back with about an hour or so left in the concert, and he was in a cast on crutches. Interestingly, the man who was hit with the beer bottles was in the bed next to him at the hospital. Turns out the girl had cheated on him at the concert with some guy, and the guy and his friends were the ones who smashed his head with the bottles. It was truly wild times. Story 11. I foolishly wore sandals to an outdoor concert in the 1990s. While in the mosh pit, someone's boot came down hard on my big toe and ripped the entire nail out. The strange part was that my toes were painted red. So for a brief moment, I did not realize what had happened. It left a perfect nail-shaped red spot of blood, and I was so shocked that it did not hurt. The person felt very bad about it, and we ended up dating for 6 months. Story 12. I arrived there an hour early to wait at the front, and then 2 people behind me, after it filled up, leaned on me so hard on the barrier, purposely crushing me so I would move. I am small, 5 feet 2 inches, and they were a lot bigger than me. I did not move even though one of them was putting all her weight on me on purpose. Then, she managed to shove the girl next to me to get to the front, and her boyfriend, who was 6 feet 3 inches tall, continually leaned on me to crush me and kept smacking me in the face by waving his arm in front of me. It was miserable. I had waited to see the band since I was a teenager, and my partner kindly drove 2 hours, and we got a hotel so I could attend. 2 girls next to me acknowledged they were complete jerks. Towards the end, I shoved him really hard, and he eased off a bit. Honestly, they were total jerks. It was completely intentional. It was not because the place was packed. Story 13. At Bonnaroo in 2008, a couple in their mid-20s started having intercourse on the ground during a Metallica performance. Both individuals had their pants down to their ankles and kept their shirts on. The funniest part was that a large circle formed around them, and everyone started chanting. I can't remember exactly what we were chanting, but everyone was keeping them going. After he finished, everyone started cheering, patting both of them on the back, and then went back to enjoying the show. Story 14. I was standing with friends outside the venue early to get a front row spot in the pit. Security came out and took 10 of us inside, and Audioslave played 6 songs for us for the soundcheck. It was the highlight of my concert experiences. Story 15. This girl was by herself at the front of a Death Grips show at Bonnaroo. She was like maybe 5 feet tall and less than 100 pounds. She had no idea what she was getting into. She was getting bounced around everywhere, so I told her to get on the rail and put my arms on either side of the rail to try and keep her from getting crushed, but kept getting slammed from behind and knocking into her. Eventually, I was like, "I'm sorry, are you okay? Do you need to get out?" And she, nervously and looking terrified, shook her head yes. I flagged down a security guard, pointed to her, then to the other side of the rail. He picked her up under her arms like a baby and set her on the other side. Saw her mouth. "Thank you. Sorry you didn't get to enjoy the show, tiny stranger." Story 16. I was at a concert in Nashville on New Year's Eve one year. A bunch of us got brunch earlier in the day, and my buddy took a bunch of cured ham to go and stuck it in his pocket. That night, while we were peaking on acid, and the clock struck midnight, he started throwing the ham into the air, yelling, "Happy New Year!" It was awesome. Story 17. It's a bit of a long story, but absolutely one of the weirdest coincidences of my life. I was in the pit at a Jason Derulo concert about 4 hours from where I live. There was a cute girl standing next to me with a group of her friends, and I decided to strike up a conversation. I asked her where she was from, and she says the town, which is about 2 hours from my hometown. I say, "Oh, that's cool. Funny story about that town. I met a girl from there when I got my wisdom teeth removed. We were both in the recovery room, loopy from the anesthesia, and my mom said I was flirting with her and that she was from your town. I asked for her number, and her mom gave it to my mom, but I never called her. She goes, was it at this doctor's office in August of 2011? And I said yes. We pulled out our phones and had each other's number saved. We didn't even know each other's names. Our moms had both put our numbers in our phones as dentist girl/dentist guy. Sadly, that's where the story ends. We didn't get married or anything cool like that, but it was so wild and random, it almost felt like a prank. When people say small world, I can't imagine it ever being more small than that moment for me. Story 18. I found a duct-taped, beat-up Vans slip-on in the pit. So, I did the honorable thing and held it up while I danced. It belonged to an absolute babe whom I dated for about 2 years in college. A real punk rock Cinderella story. Story 19. A girl was crowd surfing and something went wrong. She landed on my head and fell down. It hurt my head a lot. I helped her up and she left. She was very cute, by the way. A few years later, my girlfriend and I were talking about shows we've been to, and it turns out she was there. It also turns out she was the one crowd surfing and fell, landing on some guy. It was me. Anyway, we've been married for 10 years and have a beautiful little girl together. To this township, I believe the universe was trying to bring us together. Story 20. Live Aid was on a hot, sunny day. My friends and I looked up to see a guy systematically working his way up the crowded field toward us. He had a small water sprayer in his hand, and as he approached each person, he asked permission to spray them. He approached everyone, men and women alike. We watched his approach, and every single person agreed to be sprayed in the face with 1 or 2 blasts. When he got to my friends and me, we also agreed to be sprayed. It was pleasantly refreshing and seemed like a nice way for that guy to pass the time between acts. Story 21. At a ZZ Top concert in the 1980s, a man was thrown approximately 15 feet straight up in the air. When he came down, everyone stepped back, and he bounced off the concrete floor. They had been tossing people up a couple of feet and not letting them hit the floor. However, this one individual soared. Medical personnel came and carried the man away. Story 22. I went to see Korn at a smallish venue with a friend. We went after work, so we were not really dressed for a concert. We stood at the back, away from the pit. About halfway through, a young woman stumbled up to us from the pit and said, "You two look like the most responsible people here. Is my head bleeding?" Yes, it was. Story 23. It wasn't at a concert, but on the way home from a concert. It was a 2-hour drive home and Pink Floyd's "Shine on You Crazy Diamond" came on the radio. We cranked it up and were singing along, and then that amazing guitar solo started. After a couple of minutes, I realized that a portion of the solo was looping. It was a perfect loop that sounded like it was produced that way. But after about 5 minutes of this going on, we were like, what the heck? The darn solo must have played over and over 15 times or so before the radio went silent for a couple of seconds and the DJ came on saying sorry about that technical glitch. We thought we were tripping or something. Story 24. I went to an Infected Mushroom concert, and about halfway through, I felt a hand in my back pocket where my wallet was. I grabbed the wrist attached, and it belonged to a woman who might have been a staff member, but I was not sure. She was inserting an advertising flyer into my pocket and had a stack of others too. I asked her what she was doing, and she brushed it off, saying she was just putting advertisements in people's pockets. She then asked if I was having a good time and pretended to hang out with me for a minute. I ignored her, and she wandered away. It's not okay to reach into people's pockets. In short, I felt a hand in my pocket inserting advertisements near my wallet. Story 25. In July 1987, I was in high school in Louisville, Kentucky. My friend and I, at the very last minute, decided to go downtown to see if we could get into the Duran Duran concert. The opening band had already started. The guy at the box office was checking the tickets, his eyes got really wide, and he said it was our lucky day as he sold us front row center seats. I have no idea how that happened, but it was the best concert I ever went to. Story 26. I was in Ibiza at a big outdoor venue and had taken a little bit of MDMA for the show, just standing there dancing with a buddy and enjoying the show in the zone, when some big guy comes up and starts grabbing my arm and trying to turn out my pockets and open my hands while another woman starts shining her phone light in my eyes and screaming at me in Spanish to empty my pockets. I thought for sure they were drug enforcement or some other kind of undercover cops, so my buddy and I started freaking out that they would take us to prison for the MDMA in our pocket. We were some of the only Americans in the crowd and figured the locals were targeting us. Turns out the guy had his watch stolen and thought we had done it and were hiding it in our pockets, and we had to ask other people to translate to figure out why they were so mad at us. We are not thieves and could not believe we were being accused of this. I have never felt my heart pounding so hard, and it definitely was a buzzkill for the rest of the show. And I hope that guy never found his watch.